we said the general computer controls, just to recap what we have done yesterday. On general computer controls, we said some of the units or the areas or the domains under that is protection of information assets, which we've looked yesterday. Information systems acquisition and development, which we also touched at the end yesterday. And today we will also look at information systems operations and business resilience. We will cover today. But before we get into the IT operations and business resilience, this is the second item that we've covered yesterday. I wanted to take a look at a quick exercise regarding physical security or security in general. Identify what is wrong with this picture or identify issues that you could see within this picture. There are multiple issues. So identify, you've got 10 minutes, and then we will recap before we move on to the next topic. Just a quick refresher. Are you guys ready? Okay. So let's start. What is the first thing you guys have seen that is not open door? What else? Cup of tea. Anything else? Open system, open email. What else? Laptop, yeah. Yeah, they've mentioned the confidential papers. Anything else? Say it again. Underwear? Resumes, yeah. So privacy, personal information. Okay, no camera. Yes, that has been mentioned. Sure. Anything else? USB? There could be a data that could easily be taken. Password on a sticky note. Okay. So the book we don't know. Could be a book that he's reading. It's something related to, but there's a notebook on top of it. Could be. But so far, what you have mentioned, the open door, the confidential item on the that is not being shredded, but could easily be taken. Private personal information such as resumes on the table, the USB, the sticky note, even the credit card on the that could easily be stolen, and the wallet, laptop, and the bag that's also could easily be stolen. Misappropriation of assets could easily be done here. The open systems, if we look at it here, at least you've identified, I think, all of them. So number one is the open door. Two is the email and inbox is open. System is also could be open. There's a private security training document that also is visible. Possible encrypted USB left out in the open Could be encrypted, could be non-encrypted, but they might have some either personal or business data that could easily be taken. Credit card and wallet left unattended. CV with personal information left unattended. Laptop left unattended. Confidential document not shredded, unshredded, and left in the trash bin. So all of those are security risk, or against a lot of times companies might have what they call clean desk policy. So, and also on the laptops or the desktops, remember we talked about accounts. So when they give you an account, part of the parameters of the account would be if you signed in and there's no activity, let's say maybe in 2 minutes, some of them 5 minutes, depending on the minutes that they could set, it automatically shuts itself. So those are part of the policies or the parameters that when they're setting up either desktop or laptop, they could set to avoid cases like this. Yes. True. I mean, if you don't have a camera, at least you're supposed to lock if it's your office, or people might not be able to. But this is just an example to see in a small desk how many security issues that could be raised. So that was basically the exercise to train you to identify any security weakness. So automatically you picked it up. So all the risky items, these are what we call inherent risk. That could easily be taken. It means that without a control, the cameras are controlled. See, without a control, these risks do exist. If you don't close the door, if you don't have a camera, if you don't set up the desktop, all of those are controls. It shows that there are inherent risks. Without a control, these could be materialized, these risks. Any question in regard of what we have covered yesterday? Information security or protection of information assets, system development and acquisition, even if you have any in general, if you have any clients that are going through either new system implementation, which they either acquired or which they are developing, if you have any questions regarding that, if you have general question regarding security, please feel free, don't hesitate.
Do we have any standardized template to monitor and SLA?
No, because there's no specific standardized SLA, isn't it? Because the SLA would depend on your business or what the outsourced service is and how you wanted that to be regarded. I mean, monitoring of SLA is very easy because it is not you who's supposed to be monitoring, it is the client. So if there is an SLA, the first thing you're supposed to be asking is where is the reporting? And there has to be a periodic reporting. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly, it could be 6 months. How management would know that the SLA is being met? The only way to know is if they are getting reports. Whether those reports are accurate, that's another point. Then annually, you should be asking audit reports that are done, whether it's their normal auditors or whether they do. In America, a lot of times, before there used to be something called SAS 70, now I think it's called SSAE 16, something like that. Basically, it's an audit of a service provider. So because the service providers are let's say call centers in India, they're providing services for thousands and hundreds of clients. They cannot let every client audit them, isn't it? Because otherwise every day would be an audit. So what they do is, since the service they provide is a standard service, they themselves will engage a third party, mostly a Big Four or a big accounting firm that is known, and they will say, could you please, basically it's like an agreed upon procedures. These processes, which we offer as a service, could you come and audit? There used to be two types of audit in that regard. What it's called back then, at least it used to be called SAS 70, but it used to be called type 1 or type 2. Type 1 means that you are only looking at the design of those controls. Type 2 means you're looking design and operating effectiveness of those controls. So depending on which, if they're new, then the first thing they have to do is type 1, just to make sure that the design of the controls are adequate. Secondly, they will have to do type 2, which is the operating effectiveness. So once they do that, then all of their customers, they will be able to give these reports. If there's any issue, then it shows the issue. So from that, you could also get some comfort. But still, they have to supply you, or they have to provide you periodic reporting based on your own SLAs. Any question, any comments? Correct. For CISM? CISM is certification for the person. Whatever certification is done, certification is the person. It's not a standard. Certification is for the person who basically it says that you are knowledgeable in this area. Say it. I didn't hear you. Yes, there is a manual for CISM, just like CISM would have a manual to read. You're talking two different things. CISM is part of ISACA. ISACA does the standard. So standard is one thing. Certification is completely another. Accounting, ACCA is an accounting certification, isn't it? Is there any standard for ACCA? No, accounting standards are different, whether it's IPSAS or whether it's a IFRM. Standard is one thing, certification is another. Those are completely two different things, just like accounting, ACCA or CA or it's not the same as the what do you call the accounting frameworks or accounting standards. When you learn, there are similarities that you will learn, but it's targeting different things. So it is not a standard to be applied when you are learning in accounting, or the same thing when you're learning CISM. It is not a standard to be applied. They will teach you the things that are, let's say, encryption, network, data security, access definitions, privileges, all of those. But what to apply, then the standard have to be, you have to look either NIST, ISO 27000, or others, including COBIT has a control environment, and that will give you domains that will give you certain security controls. That 1000 is quality, isn't it? Yes. So that is different. That it doesn't matter what your process is. It tells you how to go about quality. Basically, it's a documentation or process. So whether you are manufacturing or whether you are a service delivery, ISO 31000 applies to you the same way. It just tells you the process of quality management. But it does not differentiate the industry or anything. Any other question? Okay, we'll move on to the next module, which is IS operations and business resilience. IS operations and business resilience are activity involved in day-to-day running of the IT systems of the organization. So when they say IT operations, basically day-to-day operations, what are those? We've talked about printer is not working. I'm having problem with login, my password. Those are problems. Or incidents happen. I cannot access the application because the application is down or the server is down. Those are incidents. Monitoring of, now it comes to IT. How are they monitoring if system is down or not? Are they actually monitoring the network? Are they monitoring the server? Are they monitoring what these and services that they're providing? Business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Do they have any plan? If incident happens, server goes down, what is the plan to bring back up that server? If application goes down, what is the plan? So that's business resilience or business continuity. Disaster recovery is completely another. The first one is if everything is the same, I'm in my place, it's just the system that but disaster, it means I cannot have access to the facility, problem happened, can I continue my business? So those are the difference. Job scheduling, big banks, big organizations, nowadays it might not use, but a lot of times, but still some jobs are used, whether it's internal or within IT. So that's what it's called, job scheduling. A lot of times IT operators or people who are working within IT would be responsible to make sure, like let's say batch, security badges. It is a job that has to be run. So any jobs that has to be run, it has to be scheduled when to run it. Like banks, investment firms, a lot of pricing at nighttime comes in, they have to run that job. So they have to give, and when it's run, somebody have to verify. The same thing with backup tapes. When they're doing backup, you have to run it. You have to see whether actually everything is run or not. If there is any errors, you'll have to have a confirmation. You have to also document that confirmation, or it has to show on the system. Maintenance update of security systems. We talked already about in batches. We're talking about databases, applications. It also needs updates. Normal changes that are requested, batches, upgrades. A lot of times it comes in, whether it's operating system or application, especially if you bought in, if they upgrade, they might not support you unless you have to upgrade to the latest. So those are also part of the maintenance of the. Another thing on day-to-day is then with all of that, the policies, procedures, manuals, if anything have to change, then you have to be on top of it and update, review and update accordingly. So when people talk about IT operations, they are talking about all of these items. There might be different people doing it, like problems and incidents. They might assign to help desk. Business continuity, there might be a team that's not only IT, but the whole entity, but IT is a big part of it. Job scheduling, there might be operators that only deal with job scheduling. A lot of times they might be either sitting within the data center or just outside of the data center. Those are the guys, remember when I say even development, these are the guys who always bring something to production. For them, it's like a job scheduling. Just they're moving one file from one area to another. They don't care what that file is. As long as they have an approval, file name is being given, they will be told, move this from development to production or from test environment to production. For them, it's just a file, just like normal other job scheduling. They really don't care much about it. So that's the reason you segregate those duties. The developer would not have access to the production environment. You ask the job schedulers or the person who is an IT operator who either does the batches, different things, but for him, it's just running a file. He doesn't know code, maybe he's not a developer, but all he does is, his job is running those files. What security? What's that? Yeah, job scheduling, some of them could be automated, but sometimes even there are systems that only does the job scheduling. You could automate, but also sometimes some of them, a person have to trigger those job scheduling. It depends. The reason also is, even if it's automated, you need to monitor to see if it's successfully run or not. If it haven't been run, it has to be rerun, isn't it? So if there is an errors, then you'll have to also run the errors alone or rerun the whole file or back up that whole file and then rerun it. So that is why somebody have to be on top of it, whether it's automated or not. If there are jobs that needs to be run, sometimes it could be files coming in. Sometimes it could be IT jobs such as batches or such as files that needs to be moved between environments. So there are multiple reasons for job scheduling, either internal or business reason or IT internal reasons. Sure.
My office takes every month we run a payroll and a bank. So whenever bankruptcy comes up, every month a written schedule for every like this which specify that this is the last day of the bankruptcy. This is the date when we start the duration. This is the date of counting items we get, and this is the date of payroll.
Yeah. Exactly. So those are the jobs that has to be run, even though it might have been in what you call either HR or whoever is responsible running, but that is a very similar to what we were talking about, jobs. If it doesn't need any changes or anything, the application guys might run as long as they receive approval from the business owner. Say, okay, go ahead and run. For them, they don't care about the amounts and approvals and all of those. Once you give them the go ahead, you run it by that day, or sometimes in a lot of places, last company that I did work, the same thing. It has a specific dates. On this date, you give me any changes. On this date, you give me any, and let's say, pension issues. You give me any health care or health insurance issues. On this day, like let's say on the 25th, we closed it. On the 30th, we will run the payroll. So the banks could get it and everybody will be deposited. So for the IT, you reach 25th or the 30th, all they care is, are we okay to run it? An email comes to them, run the payroll, and they will just run it. Any other comments?
For example, in maintenance scheduling of the banks, they normally schedule it at those times when normally people are sleeping. They actually use their maintenance of the servers and any troubleshooting they want to do on those or updating any of those software. They perform all those functions at a time when servers are minimum.
The banks are even different because they are 24 hours, isn't it? So if they are doing any maintenance, a lot of times they will try to do it the least amount of time, because they will have to test everything and see everything is fine, because they also have redundancy, isn't it? So once they test and everything is fine, all they do is switch between two environments. So they try to minimize the time. And as you said, they will do it, let's say 4 in the morning. But nowadays, talk about HSBC or Habib Bank or what do you call Citibank. It is not only one place. 4 o'clock for you is somebody else's daytime. But the good thing is, at least that's why sometimes they will do region by region. So they won't do it all. So this region, they will do it at one time, the other region. So to avoid the
telecom sector.
yes, the time that the least use. Yeah. And they will, and even that they wouldn't be trying it, because they will try to do the testing and everything on different environment, have that backup and everything ready, and they will just switch, basically move the traffic from one, like on the network, from this to the one that's already ready, because they don't wait and update like a batch or anything or file. They will do everything, get everything ready, and then basically they will switch where the transactions or where the calls are going or where the files are going. So until they made everything ready, they won't, basically for them it's a switch over. Because they cannot, exactly, they cannot afford any downtime. So for them, they will have to have basically a complete separate system that when they did the test, everything is fine and it's working and approvals they have, all they do is switch. Now, all of a sudden, the old one becomes a test environment, and now the test environment becomes the production. Because it's probably the hardware is exactly the same. There wouldn't be any difference. That's why for them, redundancy is a big. So even under normal circumstance, a lot of places, not even big banks, a lot of places, that is why when we talk about business resilience, within the same data center, they might have a redundancy. Like servers would be two, firewalls, all the network items will be two. So one is working. So if one doesn't function, they will automatically switch to the next one. So it's just a matter of switching time, because they don't want to troubleshoot or anything while business is going. They just want to switch over. The configuration and everything is the same. It works. It is just there as a backup, as a redundancy, what is needed. So if, let's say, firewall is having a problem, they're not going to troubleshoot in a big operation. They'll just switch over to the backup, to the redundant one. Servers, the same thing. You'll have to have a available server. Nowadays, it's even easier because you have virtual servers that you will create. But it has to be exactly the same, what you call configuration and everything, because when you switch over, you don't want any. So those are business resilience, the banks, the telecoms. Not only that, you will have a redundancy within the database, well, you will also have a backup or what they call a hot site, where DR or everything could happen. So if they want to switch, they could easily switch. They could have sometimes multiple ones because they cannot afford, like 1 hour for them is a big time. Their service have to be available 24/7. That's why job schedulers, their IT works 24/7. I used to audit big banks, Bank of America, JP Morgan. When you're dealing their IT, the job scheduling or the IT operators have what they call turnover logs. The ones that what time they came to the job, all the files that they have run, success or any problems they faced, any incident that happens, they are the one who's monitoring. As he leaves the job, he turns over to the other guy. Those will be kept, because if there's any problem, they could go back and check who was working at that day, what happened. It's a 24/7 operation.
Here in the public sector, we have a common problem, that is legacy data anomalies. How business resilience will tackle that? So we have a pension role, and when we go for the master data analysis, we'll find that a pensioner is showing an age of 150 years. And there are other such anomalies that the exceptions should have been created. Those people should not be in the payroll. But the problem arises due to legacy data, because one automated set of database was captured by SAP, and it was continued, a mistake upon mistake. How can we do it?
It does happen. Actually, I had a similar thing about payroll on the whole government's payroll at in the Emirates. They had an old system, Oracle, but it wasn't Oracle database, but it was an in-house developed application, an Oracle database. It was unreliable, but there's no other system. Payroll is still run. So auditors were, what should we do? I mean, all you could rely now is actual, remember we talked about test of substantial detail. There's no way you could rely on systems, because we've proved that the system data is not accurate. And there's a lot of problems. So all we had to do is verify, basically say all of these are problems like the ones that you're mentioning. What they have done over there was they've moved to Oracle HRMS. We basically try to nail them by saying this, and the guy says, like, either I go forward or I stay with this system. So I'm not taking any more risk than that already exists. Actually, they went through 2 or 3 iterations of data cleansing. They've hired KPMG. We still got, even every time they've done, actually, they were very cooperative. Every time they've done, they used to call us. We used to run and bring additional. When we've done almost 3 iterations, they said, "Khalas, yani, we've done enough. We'll go ahead with it live. The risk is the same risk as we started." But the good thing was they said, we recognize this. We will cleanse as we go along. So every month, entity by entity, because remember they were doing, so they said ministry by ministry, we will start sending teams to look at the files and to compare with what the database has. So what you are saying does happen, especially with legacy. The only question is, are they cleaning or are they just leaving it? Because now they're doing walkarounds, which is fine for now. But if they're not cleaning, then you will never gonna finish that walkaround. There has to be a data cleansing exercise, which is gonna take a lot of effort or sometimes time, but they have to start. If they don't, yeah. Exactly, yes, yeah.
So we got that there and now.
So you found a great workaround. Exactly.
Now it's been done, the working on it, it's started in March, biometric verification and start. And our system is connected to the system of Canada. So when the person will do their biometric, then we usually get their feedback. Our system needs to know that whether they are alive or not.
Absolutely. Exactly. In your case, is it the military pension or is it the regular pension? It's both. It's a matter of, it is not the auditor's job, it is the entities that are responsible to start a big project in regard of data cleansing, because if they want to use the system, then they will have to start.
Verification is also problematic. Biometric doesn't stay as it is. With the older people, their impression they get challenging. And they need to get back to the biometric.
Yeah, but now we're talking about, how would I say?
The law says that the elderly people should not be disturbed. If the verification is required, it should be done by the offices, not the burden of proving them as the biometric is intact. It should not force a stoppage of the pen.
Nobody's saying we will stop, and nobody will accept stopping. It was the same thing on the payroll when I was dealing Emirates. They will say we cannot stop the payroll. I mean, you could threaten it if you, as much as you want, but because the person who is working or the pensioner, it wasn't his fault that somebody entered incorrectly his data, because the files that are actually the place have about 90% of the time, or even 95% of the time, have the accurate information. So if a child was born and he's taking a child bonus or whatever it is that they take over there, he was providing, maybe with delays, anything, but the physical file has accurate information. It's just the system that didn't have. So in order that to update, you basically have to, that's why I said they've hired KPMG, they hired what you call data entry firms to basically go and do it. It is the same thing here. It will take a Herculean effort and a hiring of probably a data entry companies to verify the pensioner's information. As far as controls are concerned, because what you're talking about is 150 years old, there's no way that he will be alive and taking pension. So first of all, the data integrity is one thing to verify. Second thing is, okay, what controls could we put in place not to happen this again? It was a simple, I've done very similar thing in regard of, it wasn't a pension, but it was a welfare. It was the same thing. people who are 90 years old. So I've picked, I mean, few of them could be alive, but if I pick 190-year-old or 92, 98 years old, I'm like, I don't think all these 100 people are alive or are taking. Let them claim. Let them claim, exactly. Let them claim, or their families will come. Exactly the same thing. You could say, because annually, the welfare system was annually, they have to certify that the person is alive. So somebody has to come. So again, that's another way of verifying, where payroll, you don't have to verify that, but pension, you have to verify that you're still alive. So how are you verifying, and how the system is capturing that verification? That's again another question.
That requires what we call concatenation. That is not embedded within the apps.
But that is the,
There are two systems that have to talk to each other.
so that is
The
that.
Nadra and the bank and the.
So those, that is where the auditors need to look at the whole process cycle, understand, and then come up with a solution that is going to solve all. Because a lot of times, every entity or every group are only looking from their perspective alone. Sometimes I have been surprised multiple times. You're talking about different entities. Within entities, same building, people who could be sitting next to each other, if they are doing different things, might not be, they are talking to each other, but they're not trying to resolve issues because everybody is only looking from their perspective. It's the auditor who understands the whole process, tries to understand the inherent risk and the risk that is happening, and then come up with a solution. Your solution cannot be very specific, but you could say, okay, here are all the big points you need to solve your problem. Like, let's say data integrity. As you said, it is not the auditors to specifically say the activity. It has to be either fingerprint. You could say it has to be proven or it has to be certified, but you cannot say it has to be a biometric or it has to be a card, because you're not the one who's going to buy these or implement it and the budget. It has to be the entity who decides which activity or which control that they will implement. What we could say is that you need to verify the people in order to avoid, like the annual certifications, all of those, or whatever the rules already, regulations that exist, we say you need to abide by and comply. Because in this case, it is evident that they're not complying with the rules. Because if they are complying with the rules, these anomalies didn't happen, would not have happened. Or physically, they are complying in the manual sense, but the system is not captured. So the system is not reliable in this case. Because if payments are not stopped, it means somebody is manually checking, manually verifying. And if there is nobody is doing manually, then you have a bigger problem, which is a material, could be a material misstatement in the financials. Or the payments that are paid cannot be verified that it's accurate. Any other question? Those are valid. I mean, I have dealt with them in the payroll. I've dealt with them in welfare. It was very similar. I've dealt with them also in pension, but at the time they were never able to go to the new system. They kept almost like 3-4 years. They were saying we are still implementing the system. They reached to the pension to the point where collection is one process. Payment is completely different process. It was not linked because there was no system that could link. So if I need to apply for a pension, whether you're mostly the Emiratis, now I have to bring all of my verifications from the companies or the ministries that I used to work. So payment is really not linked on contribution. Because the system, so it took them a while. I'm not sure how they fixed it, but like 3-4 years, those two weren't connected. And then contributions from private, any Emirati that is working on the private weren't contributing, or nobody was actually checking. There were supposedly inspectors, but like two or 6 inspectors out of whole Dubai or whole of the companies. So it was almost impossible to to get those collections, and the people are by law entitled. So what they were doing, when you retire or when you are retiring, they will say, okay, bring me how many companies you worked, or whether it's a government or private. You bring your file. Your HR basically provides a whole new dossier or file of you and sends it to the pension authority. They will take that, they will verify. They have to manually. I don't think they will ever, I was pretty much sure they weren't checking against the contributions. Those contributions sometimes were just coming, number of people, and the checks were coming to them, but it wasn't tied to individuals. So those issues do exist, but if you don't start cleansing, if you don't start using the system properly, then there's no way you will be able to be out of it. And when you have that case, as you said, auditors cannot verify. The problem with that also is there is a plenty of chances for fraud. Because on the welfare, I knew the cards family could have, they just go and pull the money, reporting whether the person passed away or not, or whether, because those are ATM cards on the banks. They will come and say, okay, as you said, 80 years old, they cannot walk. Why don't you come to the house? Okay, maybe we will come this year. The person might just say, okay, khalas, we will give them. So there is a very potential of a fraud when that happens. Okay. Any other questions? Some of the control objectives: backup and recovery, job scheduling, problem and incident management, and monitoring. Financial data are backed up completely. Is it also recoverable? That's another thing you see. Whenever you talk about backup, ask them if it's recoverable. It means, could you read that data? Could it be used? Has it been tested to be used? Because if you keep backing up, regardless whether it's tape, disk, or on another server, if you cannot recover it, then there is no point to it. Job scheduling are programs that are executed in a planned on a timely manner. IT operation problems and incidents are identified, resolved, reviewed, and analyzed. So it's basically explaining what each means. There are few areas that your entity requested to be given some attention. And as you guys probably were asking sometimes, either work programs or controls. So in these 4 items, data management, network connectivity, system security, and business resilience, we've come up with a few examples of control objectives, risks, and also control activities that you could take a look at it. You could use it in your audits if you want to, but those are the areas. And the control objectives and what we've came up is not basically from us. We've looked at it from COVID, ISO, and ISO 27000 or other standards, and we will look at it from here. So as you could see, relevant COVID objectives, ISO, if it has, and then we will look at what is the area, what are the relevant risks, what are the expected controls, how could you verify the controls, and then what type of documents you should be looking at. We get 10-minute break and then we'll come back and go through this in detail. Maybe 15-minute break. Okay, let's just start again. So let's look at the audit programs that we have said. The data management audit program would be the first. So there are different areas to look at: data governance, data classification, data privacy, data quality, and data backup and recovery, data security. So those are the areas within the data management audit that you could take a look at it. So data governance how do you ensure risk would be lack of data ownership. So data ownership is something that we look at, because if you want to classify the data, later you will see data classification, which is the next, then somebody have to own that data and classify it. So data ownership, so lack of data ownership would be the risk. Data governance framework, so review data governance policies and procedures. Where would you see it, or how do you know it, or what documents to look at? Data governance policies and procedures to see if it specifies ownership of the data. What type of standard are they using for data and governance? So inconsistent data standard might create confusion. So you look at data governance, if there is any committees or people who are dealing with it, what are the roles and responsibilities? Data governance committee, if there is any committee, then there will be a meeting minutes to look at. How do they manage security services or access privileges, or access is given? So unauthorized data access would be an issue. So your expected control would be access control policies. As we've said, also predefined access definitions or access definition matrix. Test access control to ensure only authorized personnel can access sensitive data. Again, you would look at data governance framework document, or if there is a data definition that has been done. Data classification. Risk could be inadequate data labeling. So in order for you to know which one needs more security or not, then you will need to know secret, confidential, internal, or public. So it has to be labeled accordingly. So that has to also be defined. So manage identity and privacy, data classification policy. Steps to be review data classification policy and procedures. If there is any data classification policy, then that is the document that you would like to look at. Mishandling of sensitive data. So how data is handled. If it's classified, then you would look at data classification training if it has been done. Data classification policies and procedure is the document or the audit step that you will do. You will verify those policies and procedures do exist. Data leakage or loss. So what are they doing in regard of a data leakage? Is there any prevention in place? Evaluate data prevention, data leakage prevention measures, review incident response procedures. So one of the areas you look at the data labeling guidelines and how any output, especially the ones that are labeled, let's say either secret or confidential, who has access to it, who could print or who could even copy. So those you will see what control do they put in place, not only the training, but you could directly say, okay, when something is secret, who would have access to those data or even confidential. Data privacy, non-compliance with privacy regulations. If there are regulations, then you will look, that's your risk. Privacy policy is your expected controls. So you will look at or review if there is any privacy policy. You will verify if there is any privacy policy document. How do you manage unauthorized data sharing or unauthorized data access? Consent management process, assess effectiveness, consent management process. Inadequate data anonymization. Data anonymization process, review data anonymization process. Do you understand what does it mean? We talked about this week, clients refusing to give you data. Let's say maybe they say it's a private, it's sensitive. Our intention of audit is one thing, there are other things that we might not be interested in, isn't it? I mean, one of the reasons that we're looking is either if I'm looking at access, I just want an access definition. I don't care the person's address. I don't care the person's maybe marital status. If it's payroll, then it's a different. So I will tell them what fields I need, I could pick. But if there is an existing report, or when I ask, it's we say anonymize. Don't even give me the person's name if you want, as long as either it has an employee ID or something, just to identify the sample that I picked. So there has to be a way that they will be able to anonymize the data, either by directly going to the database and pulling the information that you only need, even though you still have to verify the completeness, but there's an agreement that you could come. But also if it's going out, then there is a way that they could anonymize information. So again, all of this anonymization is part of the privacy. Inaccurate or incomplete data, data validation controls, that is what we were talking about today. Review data validation controls such as data integrity checks or validation rules. So we've talked about that in the pension. You need to check, there has to be some rules built into it. On the data, like in the case of, as you said, even if you allow 110, 120, 150 should not be processed any payroll. So that is data validation checks that you could check. Maybe 130 is a cutoff you could make and say, okay, we could fairly say 130. So if the system is coded that way, then it automatically validate that information, and it will refuse, even either to input or if it even exists payroll to run. So that's what we call data validation on the integrity. When you're entering it, we talked about edit checks, all of those are data validation processes to ensure that data integrity. Data inconsistency, data reconciliation process. If you have different tables that captured certain information, you could actually look at or compare or reconcile data. So if there's any data reconciliation process or documentation, that could also be looked at. We've talked about annual certification. If there is information that they will have to provide and you have to key in that information for the annual, let's say there is a table that captures, that should have been cross-checked against the master data that already exists. And if there is any difference, let's say address changed. So that's what you call data reconciliation. You reconcile the one that you had before or the new one, or maybe you will take the new one. So that's a reconciliation that happens. Lack of data quality monitoring. Is there any data quality metrics? Review data quality metrics and reports to assess organizations' ability to monitor and address data quality issues. In regard of what you were talking at the pension, probably that doesn't exist. So that is what they need to institute. Cleansing is one step, but after that also, as you said, whether it's a controls, data validation, they have to put system controls in place. And once they do that, then they will have to do metrics to see, okay, we need to see every month before maybe we pay, we will run these data checks, reconciliations or data metrics. We will see how many people are, let's say, more than 100 or something like that, and then they could verify. Yes. That is your metrics and reports. So that is an exception report, including. Because you set up the parameters of that exception, isn't it? Like age could be one. Yeah. If it's for, let's say, the child who are still taking the pension, as you guys were mentioning, male and female would be different, isn't it? So I could say, okay, male, if it's more than 24 years, then pick up. Data loss or corruption could be another risk. what you will review is data backup procedures, including backup frequency, retention period. Is there any offsite or storage, recoverability, or whether the data could be recovered? So is there any data backup procedures? You will look actually if it's been implemented or not also. You could observe that process. Inadequate recovery mechanism. So that's what we talk about. If there is a backup, then recovery has to happen. So you will look at also not only data recovery, but could there be any disaster recovery plan? You could look at those documents. Continuity, backup access controls, test the backup access controls, who has access to do the backup recoverability of that. Basically, also you could check if that is the case for DR and the business continuity. One of the key things is, first, do they have a plan? Secondly, have they ever tested it? So if I have a DR site, have you ever been to that and actually did a work from there? That's the only way to know if it actually will work when it's needed. So testing have to be done for the DR and the business continuity. Data security, data breach or hacking, information security policy, review information security policy and related documentation, evaluate adequacy and test of operational effectiveness. So you will look at data security policy. You will ask them, do you do any penetration testing? Have they done any vulnerability assessments? Those are the areas to look at also or ask. But you will start with the policy. Do they even have a policy that governs that? Another risk could be weak authentication measures, user access control. We talked about access definition before. Test user controls such as password policies. Is there any multi-factor authentication required, or do they institute it? That's another thing you could ask or know. How do they actually provision access? Is the access predefined per the job requirement? So user access control documentation, not only password, but you could also look account setting. We've talked about, does account lock itself up after 2 minutes? Also, if the account hasn't been used for 3 months, will it also deactivate? All of those are also the account settings. So the policy should actually define those, and then you could test and see whether those are actually applicable into the system, because all you need is just one test, those things, because it's a parameters. You'll get a screenshot to see whether they meet the controls as defined on the policy. Inside the threats, security incident report would be the control to expect. Review security incident response procedures and assess their effectiveness in detecting and responding to insider threats. Security incident response procedure documentation, records of security incidents and their resolution. Are they also monitoring? That's one of the first questions on their network, regardless. Remember what I said yesterday about if I'm looking at access, and denial of access is a report, as an exception report. If it's internal, then you could see who is trying to access. If I'm not looking, then I'd have to wait until some incident happens, but that is a way to prevent it also, denial of access. Now we jump to network security or network connectivity. Inadequate network design. Remember we talked about DMZ, what systems are facing the internet, what systems should not be facing, how the network have to be designed. So network architecture or the network design is a key. So review network architecture plan and documentation. You will look at it. If you're not an expert, you could consult with somebody who does, is this the best practice or a good way of designing or working on the network? Insufficient network capacity. We talked about before capacity of the not only the network, the servers. So if it doesn't have the bandwidth, then you wouldn't be able to actually operate in this case. So network capacity planning, review network capacity planning and assess its adequacy. Another way to look at this is network capacity, they should be monitoring. So you could see if monitoring, if the capacity is always what level it is. So if they're already on the 90% capacity, then if they're adding any new systems, then it really cannot take that capacity. You could know also from that angle. So the capacity, you see the following question, redundancy. So if they don't have, then if one system fails, then do they have a backup system, which is a redundancy? So is there any, remember we just talked about this morning, even within the data center, you will have to have each server, firewall, switch, a redundant one to fall over. That's what they call fallover. So right there, this is what they're talking about. Redundant network, evaluate the present effectiveness of redundant network components. Do they have? So you could do a walkthrough and check. Network segmentation, unauthorized access is another issue. So look at networks segmentation. If you already have the design, then you could see if it's being segmented, like the DMZs, the ones that are facing an internet, DMZs would not be facing the internet. So segmentation is how network is segmented. Another risk is lateral movement of threats. So if somebody accesses it through one, could he move? That's why segmentation will help you. Could he or she move to another area of your network without being authenticated? So also depends access control, moving from one network site to another or one segment to another. So review network segmentation plan and configuration. Test access control to ensure proper segmentation and prevent lateral movement. So if I have access to this, maybe I should not be having access to the other side, or you will look at, again, remember what we said about access. It has to be commensurate to the job responsibility. So if somebody doesn't have anything to do with the payroll, then they shouldn't be having access to payroll system at all. So the same thing, the network that are protecting the or communicating the payroll, then that person should not have access to. Data breaches, intrusion detection, we've talked about before, vulnerability assessment. Monitoring of the network, we've talked about. Intrusion detection, basically that's what it means. Do they have system logs, assess their effectiveness in detecting and responding to threats? Intrusion detection system, logs, incident response procedures, those are the areas to look at, or the documents to look at. Network device management, unauthorized device access, as we talked about within the network. Remember we said the firewall, the switches, everybody doesn't have access. The network administrators have access. So access to the network or these specific devices is critical. So you don't want everybody to have access to it. So test the device authentication network for the devices. So you will see who have access from the system itself. Then you compare based on the org chart you already have, who should be, who is the network operator or the network engineer. Those are the only people who should have access to the network appliances or the devices. Manage quality, configuration management is the control you expect. Review configuration management process and assess their effectiveness. Configuration should be treated similar to change of the code. Somebody have to request it, somebody have to approve it. It has to be done testing, and then it has to be applied. So do they have that whole process when it comes to configuration? The person who have access should not just go ahead and change the config. Remember we talked about
नहीं, वो
yesterday
ले गया था
also.
मेरे ख्याल से, जब मैंने पूछा था आपसे।
कौन सा होना सर?
वही कंसल्टेंट का ना।
नहीं वो मुझे तो आपको उसमें जो ना का एक ही था, उसमें तो बटर फीड नहीं हुआ था।
Is there any question? So they will know, they were listening. Lost my train of thought. So we were talking about the network, isn't it? Access to devices. Who have access to it? Network. So we said if there is a configuration, then it has to go through the process who have access to. So if the network person also, even though he has access, he shouldn't be changing nilly-willy as he or she wants it. So what we talked about, remember yesterday was, I remember now, baseline. So if I had the device configurations before, I could compare it to device configuration now. If there is any difference, then I need to get a ticket request that change has to be done and has to be approved, has to be tested. If I don't see that, then there is a problem, risk that somebody could change without any proper governance and proper authorization, proper and testing. So that's why, again, we said, what you said, also exception report. Yesterday, we talked about privilege accesses have to be monitored. So in this case, if I'm looking at the access or what the person have done, if I see any changes in the config, then I need to be referring back to the process. Is there any ticket? Has it been approved? If network has been changed, because either I could look at it from baseline or either I could look at it from the person's access at the database, because it captures. If he has changed anything, they will say, okay, config so-and-so have been changed by this person, because the ID, it will show. Data loss prevention, we talked about data loss prevention policies and monitoring reports. Network access control, unauthorized network access. That is the last thing we were talking about. Who has access? Check who have access to the controls, authorized personnel, network infrastructure, network engineers, network operators. You will also get, or how would you know? You will know it from the org chart, organizational chart, and the job descriptions of the people. User access management, review user access management process. You could look at it, how access is given. You will also look at if there is any user access logs, the one that we were just talking about. If I wanted to know, then is there any audit logs that are capturing what the person is doing? Authentication of the system, like in this case, maybe I should be requiring dual authentication because it's a critical, somebody who has access to the network, and he or she might have provided even a phone for him to get the OTP. Authentication mechanism, documentation, and authentication logs. Any question in regard of the security? Device authentication, and what else? Strong, it only means like hard or extra. Remember we said two-factor authentication, that's a strong, but that doesn't mean device, it means the item that I'm trying to get access to. Device is the asset that I'm getting access to. Strong, it means how am I getting access to it? Is it easy or is it strong? Did you understand? Okay, let me give you another example. If I'm coming this room, what I need is to come here, isn't it? Inside the room. That is the device. It's the asset. It's where I want to get to. How am I getting to? Is the door. So is the door has a key? Is it has a other mechanism? That is what we're talking about. Okay, is it a strong access entry or not? So device is the like firewall or the switch or the router. That's the device itself. Device authentication, what I say is how am I getting access to it? So that is the one that is either strong or weak. That's a device, yes. So how am I getting into? Because some of them, depending on how it's configured, if I open it could be on, isn't it? And some of them will require me to put a password. So that password, or even the length of that password, could be easy or could be strong. So the device is the item, the asset itself. how authentication is basically how am I getting access to? So if they say device authentication, they're talking about how am I getting access to? If they say strong authentication, it just means it is hardened. Okay. Say it again. You said the password. What about? Okay. Sure. Yeah. Password itself is an authentication method. So authentication is basically verification of the person. That's what authentication means. You authenticate basically is you verifying the person. So if the password, let's say, allows 4 digits, or if it's 8, 4 is weak or easy, 8 is strong. So from password perspective, 8 is a strong in authentication. Yes. Yeah. Sure. How are you saying this is strong? As long as it's 8, as long as it confirms on the 8, it is strong. Alphanumeric character, then it's strong. If it's 8 only, but I could put 8 numbers, it's not strong. But if I say alphanumeric, or also capital and lowercase and character, now that combination makes it strong. Another way, if I say strong authentication, what we talk about now was only password, isn't it? And password could be weak or strong. If I say strong authentication, I could mean, as I said, 2-factor authentication. So password alone might not be this, enough. I might need a biometric, your eyes maybe. You could look at the camera and it will open, let's say desktop. If I'm talking about physical, I need your fingerprint or your eye. So that is a strong authentication. Yeah, a strong, basically, verification. Authentication is verification. When they say device, now they're talking about authentication of the device, not physical or not anything specific in device. Here we are talking about network. So it could be a switch, it could be a router, it could be a server. So that's one is an asset, the other is the method of getting access to, method of verifying the person. Yes, in the policy, security policy. So it has to say, just like the password, it has to say alphanumeric, capital and lower, and what you call character. If it says all of that, then when I look at, as you said, how it's coded in the system, coded meaning how system is put, because I could choose that, then a screenshot of that is enough for me to say, okay, that is a strong password. The same thing, if it's required 2-factor authentication, the policy would have to say. But in that case, let's say if I'm requesting OTP, then the person, does he have a phone? Is the phone provided, or are they requiring the phone, the person have to have a, let's say, a smartphone or a phone that will accept the OTP? Or a lot of times companies used to give what you call a token that gives you the number, the OTP number. So the people would have that token. Any other question? So here is a look of a network diagram, just an example. A network diagram. You could see the segmentation, isn't it? There is a segment. The cloud here, this is a segment that's different than this segment. Isn't it? Even though there might be different things. Here is the access to the internet. It has, it's coming through, firewall. Segmentation also through these, segmented through this firewall. So when they talk about segmentation, this is what they're talking about, then dividing. And each, if it's coming, it's coming through one source. No, network expert, but some of the simple things, if you want to know whether this is adequate or not, you could consult with an expert or network guy or security expert. But the idea is it segmented, especially if I'm going through public, which is the internet, am I coming through going out or coming in, information has to go through a firewall. It's the same thing with the cloud. So going through a cloud, I have to go through the switch, the routers. Here is another one that's going through another network. As it comes, either it goes there or it goes here, it goes to another firewall here. And it comes to here. The certification machine, different servers, we call it server farm. This is behind the firewall. Basically, this is just to give you a quick example of what a network diagram would look like if you haven't seen it before. So when you ask network diagram, they should give you something like that. So you could tell the difference also is because it has to say what which each item is. Whether it's a server, virtual machine, they would say firewalls, each one of them has its own diagram. Here is a proxy. On either side, so you can see if you Google it and say go to image, it will show you what each would mean. Any question in regard of network or security?
Who will define UAT for?
You mean user acceptance testing? This is the production one. If they have, when they are bringing, let's say, if I want to bring a router for the switch, this is what a switch. If I want to make this two switches, first of all, I need to test that switch, isn't it? And then bring it in. So user acceptance testing, mostly is the applications, but these are tested by the network administrator themselves. A lot of times, if they have a redundancy, then they could test the redundancy and then bring it in here. And then also have one for the redundancy. So the configs, if they're bringing one, then they will have to update. Another thing also with, if they brought additional devices, then they would have to update the network diagram, isn't it? As we said this morning, if this is a bank, or if they are also doing it, let's say in production, and they're bringing, as you said, user acceptance, then they have to do it off hours. So run it, see if it's working, then say, okay. A lot of times, be it an application or be it a device, if there is any change, one of the things that you really need to ask as an auditor is just to see the process, not only the authorization, user acceptance. Do you have a backup plan? If things didn't work out the way you want, you have to have a backup plan. Majority of the time, basically, is going back to the old system, but it has to be planned. Because if you didn't plan that, then you could be in a big trouble. Business continuity management. One of the first thing for business continuity is business impact analysis. It's very similar to risk assessment, but this one is very specific to business continuity. In order for you to prioritize, because two things mostly come up from business continuity. Recovery time is important. And what items would I be recovering? And how quickly would I be recovering? Recovery time and recovery objective, I guess, was the other one. So in order for me to define those two, I need to know the impact or the criticality of my systems, whether it's applications or devices that are helping that application. So the ones that are critical, I might say, okay, within 3 hours I need to be, or within 1 day. Like the government, you could say maybe within 1 day. Some others, like say payroll, since I am not going to run for the whole month, it could wait for 1 week to be brought up. But others that are day to day, I might need within 1 day. So I need to decide the recovery time. But in order for me to decide, I need to first understand what business impact it will have. So that's what is called business impact analysis. So do they actually have business impact analysis? Because that will help you identify where to put your resources, which one to prioritize. Validation and verification of the business impact analysis data. How do they went through, what reports that they're using it? Who actually identified the business impact analysis? Dependencies and identification of analysis, inadequate consideration of dependencies, because those are important, because you can identify application. If you don't, that's why I said, if you don't know all the devices that are supporting this application from the servers and everything, then you didn't took into consideration the dependencies. So it's also very important. So when you're looking at it, if they've identified item, they have to identify all the dependencies. First and foremost being, where is it hosted? Which systems are supporting that? Or, okay, which systems also is it getting information from, or which systems is it providing information to? All the dependencies. You could look at the overall business continuity plan and the strategies. So BAI is the first step. And then you will look at, okay, if you identified what is your recovery time objective or recovery time, and then you will look at it. Communication and training. It's very important. Testing the plan is the most important. So whenever somebody tells me I have a business continuity, I just mentioned before, if they have never tested, if they have never run the operation from the hot side or the DR side, really it's a questionable. Also, one of the things that business continuity or the DR, there have to be specific teams assigned to it, because everybody would not be able to remember business impact analysis. I say, I have to choose which systems that I wanted first, isn't it? That also means the same thing with the resources needed. I don't need everybody in the case of disaster to show up for work. I wanted only critical people. So I need to define people in the case of a disaster, in case who will show up and who would be needed and who would be secondary. So that's also what they call a call tree. Who should be gets the call first, and do we have their numbers? Do they know they're specified? So if I call them, where do they show up? Do they know where to go? All of those. So the team is very important to be identified, just the same as the impact, the systems or the processes needs to be identified. No, it's the same thing. It's just different naming. Business resilience, it means business continuity. It's just a new word nowadays, and it used to be business continuity. Now resilience is a new word. From IT perspective, when we talk about business resilience, it means that you could take shocks. What are the shocks on those incidents? Servers that are down. That's why we said redundancy. data backup, all of those comes under business continuity, the resilience of the business.
Can be done by overcoming these issues.
Overcoming these issues?
If we know that this is going to benefit, then the result will
The question is not about growth. Growth is another thing. The question is, could you even continue the business? That's why it's called business continuity. Can I continue my business if there is what do you call an incident where, let's say, a server is down or the electricity is down? That's why we said the data center have to have a UBS. That's part of the business continuity, isn't it? Resilience. It has to have a generator if the electricity go. Continuity is the incident. If incident happens, could we continue business? Disaster recovery is more, but if a disaster happens, whether it's a man-made or natural disaster, could we still continue our business? It didn't talk about growth, these. Growth is completely different things. Could we simply continue what we were doing yesterday if today something happens?
Have a bandwidth outages due to certain security issues. Or during election, we do have. So what will be the fate of the online system?
A lot of times, certain businesses, especially I know in US, one of the banks that I was working, and even now, and certain other ones, when they are building, they don't use like the Wi-Fi or the internet that we use. They use a direct line, straight from the what do you call the lines that are brought from the sea. So they have to have a direct. Basically, they have to straight. Like let's say the government, like Nadra, shouldn't be using ISP provided internet access. And even if they're using that, that should be just their redundancy. They should be using T1 or a direct link to the internet backbone. So you will ask basically, how do you, are you getting your access? So it depends on the entity. If the entity is small, or if the entity is a regulatory body, I mean, a day or two without internet is not going to be a problem for them. But if it's a bank, if it's, let's say, the police, if it's then they have to have rather than ISP, even if the ISP is providing, but it has to have a direct link from the backbone. So the bandwidth is only the people who are buying something, isn't it? If I'm actually having the whole T1 to myself, then I wouldn't have any problem with the bandwidth. So it depends. That's how when they are buying the internet, even if it's through ISP, what they bought. If they bought a small item, then they wouldn't have access. So it all depends, because they also have to look at it cost benefit, isn't it? So that's why I said business impact analysis, that's where it's come. Can I miss the business in one day? As you said, if it's election and the bandwidth is set, maybe I could. If they're not, then they need to have a plan for it. Either buy it or either have another ISP to provide. So that is part of the business impact analysis. It has to come. So we mentioned business impact analysis, mentioned the overall plan, the team that's also needed, and also most importantly, I could put all of these things together because remember, all of these are on paper. Business impact analysis in some paper, overall plan is paper, the team that I chose, yes, the individuals exist, but it's going to be on paper unless it's tested. I don't know whether these, basically it's like a policies or the plans that are on paper, whether they work or not. So your first question is, once you verify all of those, have you ever tested it? From the business side, it's not only DR. Remember we said about redundancy, even on the network, let's say 2 servers, those are redundant, 2 switches, 2. So what I would say is like, okay, Assume one goes down, you have to switch over to the other one. Have you ever tested? Because this one that's redundancy, if you've never tested it, you don't know whether it will take the load or not even. Your routers, your switches, your other network that are redundancy, because a lot of them, you're supposed to have two of them in order to continue the business. But if you've never tested it, so once in a while you need to move from, let's say, one router to the other and see if the business continue, or one switch to the other and see if you would continue your business, because those are just testing it. Two items are the same.
उसके बाद आगे जरा जाओगे और
They write the questions. Any question from our side, from your side? From remote? Sure.
I'm auditing the network. And I want to monitor the log of the network device. I'm not a technical person, like, or not technical person. So for every device, extract logs and to actually analyze logs, there need to be different tools to analyze logs, analyze logs.
Correct.
So does an IS auditor have to have expertise in those tools that actually extract and analyze databases?
It's good to have. If you have the knowledge or the expertise, or there are tools also to look at it. It's basically like a job that you run, it goes out. Majority of the time, it's not going to change anything. Whether it's a server or specific device, it will basically give you back the configurations of the device. Any normal person, you could easily ask them to give you the configuration of that device or the logs of that device. The logs is the activity, but configuration is another thing. Configuration is easy because you are comparing it to whether it's a policy or a standard. So there, every device has a basic standard that the manufacturer probably recommends. So if they don't have their own policy, then that could be your fallback. If you're talking about activity, let's say on activity on firewall would be had, because firewall, a lot of data is coming and going through, isn't it? First and foremost, you need to define what specific risks that you're trying to test on that device. If it's the administrator access, then the logs you're looking is the what administrator access have done, or the administrator ID has done. So it's very limited. And then you could look at it on your own. If you're looking, as I said, configuration, you could ask configuration himself, and then you could compare to the policy or the standard. But if you're looking other activity, the network is designed data to go back and forth, isn't it? That will be very hard for you to distinguish which ones could be risk, which ones is not. Any expert would not. That is why there are devices. Their job is only to do that. That's why I said devices that use nowadays AI to distinguish between a regular traffic and irregular traffic.
I was telling you where we were to actually evaluate a system that an entity claims that is procuring through online bidding.
Okay.
And the guidelines are somewhat dubious, like they call for technical bids 2 days earlier than the financial bid. So we need to evaluate whether there is a risk that the technical bids are being viewed earlier than the financial bid. They are not being opened on the same day. So we actually ask them to share their database dump. And being a person of not so technical expertise, I could not actually extract that dump. I could not get the tables that they are maintaining in their database. I could not actually get the log of those access. So we have to get help of some technical person.
Sure,
So
but
as an IS auditor, is it very normal to have a technical person in the team, or we have to have some little expertise on issues that we may not very much rely on other?
it's not required. anytime you, either you develop or you utilize any expert, it is fine. But it's not for you to be an IS auditor, it's not a requirement for you to be either a DB admin or a network administrator level knowledge, because that is not your primary job. Your primary job is audit. What you need is, in this case, the case that you just explained, it has nothing to do with network. It's all about database and the transactions that are actually happening. It's an application, and the application has a database. What you're looking at is two things one thing you will need to know before you start anything. What you need to know is in order for you to know the tables, there's something called data dictionary. So you will ask them the data dictionary. You could walk through with them even and say, okay, because sometimes it could be gibberish, the table names. You will say, okay, what is each table name? Either if it's done, it's done. If not, you could do a walkthrough, and then you decide which fields are important for my test, given the risk that you've identified. That is one. Secondly, okay, I seen that these transactions, let's say, if it's 2 days ahead of time, you could compare the two types of the transactions, the technical and the monetary. Then you could see if it's been opened before or not, who accessed. And then even if you could look at it, you could take that sample, and then you will even see whose ID it is who's accessing. Is it one person? Is it two people? Is it everybody? Then also that gives you more insider information about who is actually looking at those files. Because now I'm comparing the two transactions, isn't the technical and the monetary. If the rule is same day to be opened, I could easily find out. I'll ask the data dump. I know, as long as I know what fields, and then I will equate the date on these transactions, two different transactions. If the technical is earlier, then you identify all of those, you sample them, and you will follow up with the management. Why did this happen? I don't think you need any specific expertise. I mean, if you know the process, you could do it without having the expertise. But if you don't go through the process, that's why I always kept saying, first identify your risk, identify what you're trying to verify, and then you could easily ask, or you could have a conversation with them. Some of these things that I'm saying, data dictionary, access rights, those you need to know. If you don't, then you couldn't have a conversation or walk through with them. In that case, if you're not familiar with all of those or what to ask, then that is when you bring expert with you to go through at least even the process, and to help you with the interviews and the walkthroughs. Yeah. Any questions? Any similarities? Any other examples?
We had an organization, it's an all waste management company. So they try to convert their payment to digital mode, and they created a video wall. And when they made payment against 5,000 ton day disposal of garbage for the whole city. We carried a great volume analysis where they dumped, so 50% of dumping was not complete. But they used computer for making extra money. And the reason was that the app was developed by their own users.
Could you say it again? I'm trying to understand.
There was a contract awarded to Turkish companies to dump waste and garbage at a dump site.
Okay.
And the payment was to be made on the basis of the weight
Wait. Okay.
per 1,000 ton.
Okay.
And the payments they made were about 5,000 per day. 5,000 tons per day.
Per day.
They had a calculated number of vehicles having a compressed freight, and we could judge how many trucks they complete. And at the end of the day, those visits were posted on a video wall.
What does video wall means?
Video wall means that for the automated DAS system, that the truck was being shown.
Move,
One
okay,
to another.
okay, geospatial system.
When the dumping site, weight volume analysis was calculated. So, they had cleared payment for 5,000 ton and the disposal at the site was less than 3,000.
Okay,
So they were using this system to inflate the transportation volume, which was not on ground.
and anybody understood?
I think they must have tampered with some medical table, but it's still, because that was a sport fitting that.
The video wall was also
Yeah, okay.
showing technicians, movement.
No, that's different, that's a different thing. Let's do one at a time. The one that you explained, it has nothing to do with system.
They,
No, no,
they
the-
were using system to claim the payment.
I understand, but the way, what you explained this, you said that there is a contract, waste management contract. They are paid by the ton, the weight of the ton. Whatever system that they have, that's not my problem, isn't it? If I'm the city of Lahore, unless it's my system and my cars, and they're only, let's say the drivers that they're providing, then I could use the system. The question is, why would I care about their system, whether it's geospatial or AI or whatever it is? What is my payment based on? Tonnage, isn't it? And who monitors the place that the garbage is dumped? Which management? The municipality, isn't it? All I need is that is where my check is. It has nothing to do how many cars go, how many cars came in. So payment should not be based on their information on their cars. Payment should be based on the tonnage that are dumped. So the error is actually how payment is measured, the metric that you're measuring. It's not about their cars or geospatial or how many times they went back and forth or whether they could squeeze as much ton in one car or not. All of that is irrelevant, at least to me, because payment, I already know where are they dumping. I have a weight there. Every car comes in, I weigh it in, and that's, I write it down on a paper if I want to.
On a video wall.
That is,
Because the system is a
no, but who owns, I ask you, who is responsible on the dump site? The Lahore team, Lahore municipality.
Yes.
They're the one who's paying. The company, the company owns the dump site. So as a Lahore municipality, I contracted a company to carry garbage from, let's say, all over the city and dump it into a site. Both are managed by the entity. It has nothing to do with any system. How am I trusting? Because I gave them, I, as a city of Lahore, don't have any way. I supposed to be sitting there on the weight, in a normal weight, and verify. How can I be relying on their systems? What is that? Before I even reach a control, forget about IT or control. I'm entering a contract. So that's what I'm getting. Before I get into their system, I'm entering a contract with a party, isn't it? What is my verification of that tonnage is my first question.
A weighbridge.
Who is controlling the weighbridge? Which management? So the Lahore municipality has that information. I don't care about the company that. So whatever tonnage.
They outsourced the disposal and weighing business to a company, the always management company, and it further outsourced the transportation to another Turkish company.
That is fine because
They combined themselves and they didn't.
collusion, you mean,
Yes.
there was a collusion.
They did question that the services were not being provided and they made the.
So the two companies colluded, basically. Then
And
the,
they just colluded because they were able to project that we have a robust system of check and balance. That is fully up.
yeah, but that is almost like a game. Why would I be listening about their game? That's why I said, I don't care about what type of cars that they have, how much squeeze that they could do, geospatial, all of that has no relevance. My control on payment should have been with the way bill. So if there is any problem, then those company that has been outsourced for the way bridge is the one culprit. Even if I outsourced, I should have put one person there to make sure that they double check. Let them have automated everything because it's still the way bridge will show me the tonnage, isn't it?
Tonnage was being altered on the database.
I'm not caring about their system, I said. I'm completely don't care about their system. Payment depends on weight. And I have a way bridge. I could put one person out there for municipality to double check against it. If they outsourced to a third party, then they actually gave up the only way that they could have verified. There is no way in the world I would be relying on how many cars went out or how they could squeeze, how much ton they squeeze or anything. All of those, at least to me, is completely irrelevant. Because on the contract, weight is how I pay, and weight is managed at the way bridge. No, you could outsource, but I could still take one person, even randomly, inspection. Because the way bridge weight could be written in, because that is a physical, you could connect it to your system if you want, but that I could easily check. So I could check every third, let's say Monday, or I could come Fridays, I could come randomly, or I could post one person, depending on how important it is. I could outsource it still, because instead of 10 people working there or 20 people, I could just say one person will be sitting there. But if there is a collusion, they will pay off him too. So collusion is a different game to be played. But their system has no bearing. I'm not going to audit their system. I don't care about their system because the way the contract you explained, my payment depends on weight. And I know where to get the weight issue. Even if I need anything, I will put what you call a system. Again, forget about the collusion. I could put a system that municipality owns on that weight bridge. And that is where I'm going to count, like a simple clicker. Whatever weight, let it add.
Reality check the physical receipts.
Exactly.
Yes, and they found that physically there was actually one.
Yeah, but the problem was, I understand you guys are saying system and we're supposed to check our controls. But the problem is where you put the control in, what information you rely on. That's why I said, there is no way I'll be relying on their system in this type of contract. What I should have been relying from the get-go, not their system's weight or database somebody could inflate. And that's why I said, yeah, I would not even be relying on that at all, because if I'm the municipality, I could put regular either receipts or a device that just calculates the weight for me, that I own, even if I outsource the weight bridge. And I don't think it will cost me any big money, because basically my payment depends on that one thing, weight. Why would I care geospatial, how many cars, all of those? Weight bridge and the weight. I could either give one person or I could create a very simple device that just calculates the weight for me. Yeah. No, 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 I get it. Once, if I need the impact, then I could go that. But what I'm talking about is, again, remember what we talked about at the beginning of the day, when we're talking about control design. This contract, that where you placed your control that's supposed to show you the accuracy and the completeness of the payment was completely wrong. That's what I'm saying. The design, when you relied on their system to give you, you pay them based on their system. I mean, that is where the failure is. It's not about other controls, like where I place the control that I rely as the government or the municipality of Lahore. Yes, they will send me a bill, but how can I verify that bill? Because that is the first question. How could you verify the bill that they send me? The municipality of Lahore. All of my questions has nothing to do with the company. It will be the municipality of Lahore. If once I look at the contract, once I do the walkthrough, my first question is, how could you verify the accuracy of this bill, invoice? Yes. Exactly. That's what I say. It's the weighbridge. It's the weighbridge, or whether somebody, that's why whoever is certifying rather than consultant, I say either you put an employee in or you put a device that easily calculates the weight for you. Yes, because the question I would have asked the municipality is basically, how could you know the accuracy of this bill? There's no way they could know. So right there is the weakness or the problem. So you will say, go back to this contract or change the processes that you rely on, because the design is completely wrong. Where they are looking, the designs or where they place the control saying the database was wrong, they manipulated, it is completely irrelevant. It's completely wrong. Emphasis should have been the weighbridge. And what could be done, as you said, whether I hire somebody to be there or I have a device on the weighbridge, that is where my control is supposed to be. I have a very, not exactly, but similar case in one of an entity. They are revenue generating, they are regulator. It was a securities and commodities regulator, like they get from markets. And they supposed to get what do you call percentage fee of each transaction. And every month a check comes to them, or every quarter a check comes to them based on the market's trading activity. My question for them was, how do you know this is accurate and complete? Because you're not the market. You are not doing any due diligence. Due diligence meaning, because the market transactions are also public, isn't it? Am I getting every day and calculating separately on my own what I should have been receiving? I think sometimes it could be, there could be a difference because some trades could be canceled without your knowledge, isn't it? But that would be very minute compared to the overall transactions. So they said, no, we're only relying. So you're relying the person who's supposed to pay you his own data. You have no way of verifying it, or you're not doing your own due diligence. Or in audit, we said, it's very similar, isn't it, about substantive analytics. Like you analyze, basically say, okay, this is my, you're not even building any expectation of what money that as a regulatory you're supposed to receive. It's very hard for to rely on the counterparty of somebody who you're supposed to get the money from. You have to have a better verification. in that case, similar to that one, similar to this. Especially if you outsource two of them and you're nowhere to be seen, and you're the one who is paying the money. The municipality needs, just like he said, control of the weighbridge. Either have somebody employed, that person have to be rotated, because you don't want, if there is a corruption in the country, then you know, if already two companies could collude, he will also be corrupted. So you could, if you're putting a person, then you need to rotate that person. So you need to make it, how would I say, collusion higher. You're increasing the price on the collusion. Instead of them paying one person, they have to pay 10 people now, even though I'm only sending one, because I could rotate every day. So now they have to pay too many people. It might not be profitable for them. Remember, the whole reason is the profitability. One that nobody could change or do anything, or if they tamper would be a criminal, or I could also put a camera on, is a very simple device. Nowadays, what do you call, these devices that are becoming very, is it sensitivity? I'm losing the word.
QR code.
No, not QR code. Cars, phones, everything nowadays have, it's not a chip, but what is that? No, I'm not talking GPS. I'm talking about like a weight. It's like it could feel anything. Like the cars, the one that tells you whether the tire is inflated or not. I'm just cannot get the word. Yes, but what is it called? The devices. Sensor. All I need is a sensor that tells me the weight, and that could add up the weight. So weekly or monthly, I could easily get, and it's not expensive. And I put a camera in so nobody would tamper with the sensors. It's a very easy solution. I don't need to look at databases or geospatial applications, what controls, IT controls it has, who have access to it. All of those is no relevance. Simple sensor could solve that problem. They send you to chase the chicken when they send you, oh, our systems are robust, so we have international recognition. It has nothing to do with it. It's like a game. Literally, they are moving you away from the reality into a chicken race. It's all about looking at the risk, where to be placed, design of the control, where is the actual payment is based on. Any other examples?
So we have two types of taxes.
Yeah.
One is general sales tax on goods, and the other is sales tax on services. So sales tax on services is for the province to collect, and sales tax on goods is for the federation to collect. So there are two authorities, one is PAaa, the other is Provincial Revenue Authority. They have outsourced their operations to one company called paaa. And when we compare two data sets, the turnover with the goods is different for the same company, and the turnover for provincial sales tax for the same company is understated. They wage taxes. But the same database manager, they're providing services, and he doesn't disclose to two parties that there is an evasion going on.
So you said services by provincial, goods by federal.
And the business activities from the same firm or the company, and they're showing two different turnovers. The turnover for the goods is proper. So they say we have a turnover of 10 million, and we sold this was the input, and this was the output, and this is the VAT mode tax. But when they report the same month return to the provincial, they don't disclose the same things, same turnover there in the provincial return. And this is how there is a mismatch between what is due tax in kind of services and kind of.
Okay, so those in goods and services, it is a one-to-one. So if I'm producing a good, I'm also delivering a service. Is that one-to-one?
Yes, it might be of lesser quantum, but the business turnover should be the same.
So that's what I'm saying. The business turnover, that's why I said, is it one-to-one? So if I produce one item, am I also providing service for that one item? Okay, so if it's one-to-one, then the two numbers supposed to be the same.
So then this is what we say that the system of provincial revenue authority and federal board of revenue to talk to each other, and they should be knowing both the entries.
If it's one-to-one, yes. But also, and not also, but from audit perspective, how did you get it from their database, or did you?
We were able to cross match on test sample
On their own database?
on both categories. Because we have an audit office of federal taxes,
Yes.
and we also have an audit office of provincial.
So you used whatever that company supplied to the both the federal and the provincial, you use the data that has been given to the federal and the provincial. Okay.
But the ironic thing is that the same company providing services and for federation and provinces, they did not enable both the organizations to concatenate the data sets.
No, it's not their job to do that. But my question is, when you ask, because that is the company that's supposed to collect issue, absolutely. That company is hired basically as an outsource to collect on behalf of the government, isn't it?
It's there to manage data, electronic data, for FDR as well as provincial revenue.
So their job is just to manage the data, not to collect anything or.
Collection is the second thing. First, they have to assess what is the shortfall. So they are enabling them to assess the shortfall by the tax report.
I'm just trying to understand the company's contract, what is it?
These contract is provide automation services.
So automation, when you're saying basically it's the company's people who are filing, isn't it? Either monthly or quarterly.
The tax collecting agencies to gather the database and run analysis.
But I'm trying to understand the database. What transaction goes to the database?
Contains monthly return by the taxpayer.
So that's what I meant, it's a monthly return. So it is the shop owner, the companies, the manufacturers that are basically providing the returns, business activity, basically returns, and that comes with the bill. So this is my activity and here is the check that I'm paying for. Or this is every quarter I will pay you my taxes. Okay. One thing we've learned in general, I mean, you guys are probably more expert than I am when it comes to how to file. What you're saying is actually valid, but in order for me to carry and know the impact is, whatever sample I picked, I really need to get the actual, because even if I'm keying in, the returns are specific forms, isn't it? Is that being scanned on the system?
They are uploaded.
Uploaded as a scan, isn't it? So now I have a third-party information that I could verify against. So whatever sample you picked, if you look at those documents and compare it, then you will know when you ask them, what was their reason? I'm still saying if the goods and services are one-to-one, they're not, then they will be different. If it's one-to-one, what is the reason for the company, not to provide the same data?
They say that our audit is sample based and these turnovers were not part of the software. They draw from amongst the taxpayers and conduct only check of 5% or 10%.
From the audit you're talking about? No, no, audit, I understand, but
From the taxpayers, they have a sample. Okay, there are 1 million taxpayers, so they will have an audit plan of tax audit. They will conduct their own tax. corporate tax.
internal. You're talking about the
And
company.
This is how, otherwise, this is called self-assessment, whatever.
Yeah, exactly,
whatever
self-assessment.
is written by the taxpayer is final,
Yes.
if it is not counter checked. So they're counter checking themselves. Percentage. And they do not capture the entire. And the reality is if they conduct a continuous auditing mode, they can check 100%. Because it is an available automatic data.
Continuous audit always helps, but what I'm trying to understand is today's February, isn't it? So the month of February, they are supplying all the returns that were
For January.
okay for January, let's say, all the returns for January, they have to provide that information and whatever the collection of, let's put aside the actual money. Let's just talk about the paper that is being the return and the receivable, because the return would create a receivable, isn't it? So the public submitted their returns, the company that is being hired updated on their system, and now they have to send both the provincial and federal. So when you ask them, it's not about sample, when you ask them, okay, the month of January, what have you submitted to provincial, what have you submitted to the federal? If that does not match, and you ask them and you say why they don't match, what is their answer?
Their answer is that they're under contract just to share the information, not to give a gap analysis.
You didn't ask the gap analysis, Mike. Your question is not a gap analysis. Question is, if it's one-to-one, as you said, and the public have filed their returns for the month, the total, let's assume, was 100,000 returns. I'm not even talking about the figures, the money. When they are sending to both provincial and federal, both of them, they have to say 100,000 returns. Completeness. At this stage, I'm not even interested in the accuracy. I'm interested in the completeness of the data first. Then I will go to accuracy. Completeness of the data, the totals have to match.
They don't match.
So that is why the first question is, before I even do anything else, before anything, it is just ask the company, say, why the totals doesn't match for the provincial and the federal.
They are going to think that that government is provincial and that is federal, they do not have a concurrent jurisdiction. And they
Question.
work under different tax authorities.
I understand, but I'm not talking to the tax authorities now, isn't it? I'm talking about the company that's getting outsourced,
That
who's
government
collecting the
is not
information.
really working up to the mark. It's not providing the services as per the contract.
I understand, but from the audit side, you guys are talking to the, have you ever visited the company? Have you talked to the company?
It is refusing audit. It says, we are the service provider from the front. They don't get it. Withdrawal of-
How they are not audited?
Because they are not a public sector company. They are a corporate entity.
Yes, but I'm not auditing your financials. I'm not interested about their receivables or their payroll. I'm not auditing that.
They hide behind.
Or their cars. I'm not auditing their cars, their petrol use. I'm not auditing their payroll. I'm not auditing their receivable. I'm auditing the actual work that they're doing based on this contract.
They believe, they put across a non-disclosure issue.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with them. Don't disclose to the public, but I am not the public, I'm the government. This is my contract. The data that I am after, I'm asking them, or the question that I'm asking them is the public data that the government owns. It's the tax authority of the provincial and the federal that owns.
Meeting votes, they-
But also it depends, how did you raise it? Because the question, these things came back, I think it's even last in training, people claiming NDAs. Especially when it comes to private. The item I am after, or the question that I am after, it's not about their company's revenues or their company's financials. I am after this contract that they've entered with the government tax authorities, provincial and federal, are federal entities that audit has a jurisdiction over, isn't it?
stewardship of data is everyone.
Exactly. I'm only after that data. I'm not after their receivable. I'm not after their payroll. I'm after the data. So my question was, the data that you are supplying, why it's not the same? Because I'm after the data. And if I'm auditing the data. I'm asking data them. I'm asking the data. I'm always after that data and the transactions. That's why I said, are the forms scanned? Because I could ask that forms because those are public records. NDA is for other people, for the third parties or the regular public. But I am coming from the government. I have a jurisdiction over the provincial and the federal. Please.
There are two roles. Regarding the for food by the federal government
Yeah,
and PSC in Punjab by the producer.
yeah.
And if a company doing business of supplying goods and providing services both, then PSC is will only mention services provided by the company.
Absolutely.
Okay, and goods supplied by the company will be put in the GST return. And both the turnover cannot be matched. If you add both turnover return turnover, then it will be the business turnover, total business turnover. You cannot reconcile these turnovers. GST services and goods separately.
That was my first question. When I say, when I produce a good, am I also giving service? So in order for me, that's where my first question is, because in general, goods and services are two different things. Completely different. Hotels provide services, so the taxes on hotels, taxes on, let's say, in restaurants, taxes on, what do you call, all of those are services. But goods, like let's say hotels, they are buying some stuff, isn't it? So the purchase, whoever they're purchasing will have to have a goods taxes. So that is why initially I ask, is it one-to-one? Majority of the time it's not one-to-one. If something is not one-to-one, then you're not comparing apples and apples. They're not going to be the same number or the same figures. Unless you choose, let's say, one company that when they produce one item and they provide the service of the same item, then that's a different case. Then you could ask why these numbers are not matching. But if I'm talking about goods taxes and services taxes, the numbers will never be matching. I mean, my expectation is never to match. So it all depends on,
So they also have a third return that is called income tax.
yes.
If we have these returns before us, we can capture the certificate.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is, and that's the reason I ask, is it one-to-one? Because let's assume one company. One company. Let's pick just one company. They produce, it's a manufacturing company. Jayshri, let's say. Jayshri's returns, there would be an income because of their employees. There would be the goods that they have serviced, the goods that they have produced, And I don't know if they provide any service, like on manufacturing, they might not provide services, isn't it? So now you have only two taxes from that company, income tax and goods tax. There wouldn't be any service. So I'm not sure about tying these three or how they would be tying. Each one would be separate from tax perspective. And the only way that I would be testing is if I'm looking at income, I pick few companies, big, small, and then I see if the filing is the same as what the company understands. So I have to actually audit the company's books. Again, the company's books, I'm only looking at what taxes they filed. And then I compare what this company has. And if they match, I'm okay. But as far as the completeness of the data or trying to reconcile these three activities, I don't know and how they would be reconciling.
There is a template here available that is called one view report. So that enables the FPR data to be viewed on three sides. And then the accounts are put on SECP, that is Security and Exchange Commission. So the analysis is not denied unless more returns are given access to by audit. So auditors have detected shortfall, and which is not refuted.
Okay.
They only say that the business procedures may not allow them to capture what has been captured. It will be captured as pointed out by the audit.
One thing I have come familiar with is when issue could be much more of a problem, whether it's a system or whatever. That is when you might come up with something, as you said, a shortfall or anything. They either will be quiet or they will accept it because the problem is 10 times worse.
They don't go for the systemic.
That's what I'm saying. So the problem is 10 times worse. Initially, they will say, no, this delay. And then if you come up with something, they will accept whatever you come up and we will fix this because they know the issues could be 10 times worse. So it is a matter of based on the business logic or business understanding, meaning the regulatory understanding, what the regulations supposed to be. Remember what we said, understanding the whole cycle of taxes, how it's done, let's say each one of them, income tax, all of those. And the auditors should be doing substantive analytics on their end to see, okay, how much my expectation is for income tax, how much is my expectation for, and then compare that to what they are actually collecting. If I'm also looking at what they have collected, meaning at least what has been filed, then I could also take a sample of that file. And verify basically against the actual from the companies that have filed. So if they're accepting, I'm afraid that the problem could be 10 times worse than what they're accepting. That's mostly how it happens because there might be a big mess and they don't want you to know the big mess. We'll continue on business continuity, backup and recovery management. We've talked about backup and recovery. Review backup and recovery processes, completeness, and also you could test the recovery and backup procedures, but also the logs. We said when somebody runs a backup, it's just like a job. It shows whether it's been successful or not. Recoverability or whether they have been recovered, that's also a test that they're supposed to do. See if they have ever used any backup, even for their normal day-to-day job. How they manage IT investment. So here the RTOs is what they have talking about recovery time objectives that we've mentioned about business continuity. So assess the RTO determination process and verify its alignment with business requirement, meaning which from the PAI, it's supposed to give them what the recovery time objective would be, the items that they want to recover. Crisis management plan. Review crisis management plan and procedures. See also it is being implemented, what are the teams that are involved in it. How they manage continuity in a crisis. Again, crisis management, do they have a communication plan? The same thing with also business continuity and DR. I remember if I've mentioned communication is very critical. The people, the call tree logs, who is involved, how is it going to be communicated internally, externally? It's very important. Crisis simulation, as I said, testing, whether it's a crisis or DR or business continuity, all of them has to be tested to see actually what would have happened if an actual one comes. Risk management, inadequate risk identification, risk assessment process, review risk assessment process. Do they have a risk policy methodology? Insufficient risk mitigation, risk treatment plan. We talked about the different risk treatment plans, mitigation, outsourcing, or avoidance, or accepting. So those are different. What are they? Are they doing that? Lack of risk monitoring. Are they annually updating the risk assessment, going through from scratch? Access control management, identity management, basically account, who are they giving access control policies, logs, authentication. So here they're talking about the specific to system security. System configuration management processes, configuration audits. Basically, do they have baseline? Do they have a standard for system configuration? Lack of configuration baseline. So we talked about baseline. If you're changing anything on the configuration, it has to go through a change management process. So how do you do about, are they logging the requests, authorizations, and everything is documented? System batch management, vulnerabilities due the missing batches. So security batches, how frequently they do update, because those are basically provided by the manufacturer, whether it's an operating system or a firewall. These things are provided by the manufacturers or by the people who built it. So it's a matter of adapting it, at which frequency they do batch deployment. Batch compatibility, as I said, sometimes they might ask you or force you to upgrade in order the new batch to receive. So if you don't upgrade, then the new batch doesn't come as a regular batch. Some of them are fixing a batch, could be a file. Some of them, they'll say the new upgrade of operating system or the new upgrade of the software comes with that batch. So unless you upgrade, you don't get the batch. Incident response management is very similar to crisis. So incident response plan, incident reporting, incident analysis, because when incident happens, definitely you need to know lessons learned in order for the future to prevent. Is there new controls that have to be put in place? What has to happen in its place? We'll come back for application controls. Let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back for application controls to finish. Or if you have any questions in regard of the rest of the GCC and the areas that we've covered. Any questions in regard of the areas that we have covered? Any questions, comments, examples, anything before we move on to the application controls? Remember what we started with the first day. Why do you need information systems audit? That was the first definition. As I said, ISA 1315, which is based on ISA 315, International Standard of Auditing, which requires you to understand the entity and its environment and its internal controls and its risks. So understanding the internal controls of the entity, if an entity that uses computers, then that is part of it. That's the reason you need IS audit. So IS audit might be needed as much as every year based on that requirement, but whether you do it or what capability you have or whether you have a department, that's completely different subject. But as far as ISA 1315 is concerned, it is part of your requirement to do. It's your requirement to understand the entity, and part of the understanding is if they have systems that they are using, then you need to do an IS audit. It depends which country you're talking about, because all countries are not the same. I mean, some of them do have, some of them don't have. Some of them that have also might concentrate, let's say, on centralized systems first and then rotate every few years, different, just like internal audit might have done, different ministries, different entities in different timings, because they don't have enough resources that will cover every year. So it depends. And in UAE, let's say 15, 17 years ago, they didn't have. We started one pilot, 3, 5, 10, until we've got to a good number, but it's still, IS audit never, say the 70 plus entities, we've never been able to do it 1 year, all 70, but we had a plan for 3 or 5 years to cover all. So they could get some type of assurance, our financial audit counterparts on the systems. In certain cases, we might be used for investigations, like in the cases that they were saying, okay, who accessed it, who has done this, audit trail logs and all of those. Sometimes we've been used as an expert, let's say, to just accompany sometimes the process understanding, even though we might not be doing a full-fledged audit, but the financial audit needs it, whether it's understanding or whether it's for specific control or specific transactions, we might spend a few days with them, helping them understand the process. So it depends how also it's utilized. I've never been, and I haven't worked, but what I've heard is like in India, they might have, but they don't conduct a normal IS audit. They might be using majority of like data analytics and stuff like that, just to either investigate transactions or even help financial auditors in selecting samples, which are more anomaly based. So it depends. There's no specific frequency, and there is no, each country, depending on the org chart, talent, everything, whether they have it or not. But as we said also on the first day, not only on standards that require, but also logic will tell you, if you want to audit Nadra, If you want to audit revenue, and if they have these systems, everything is system. We had an example, isn't it? Waste management company that has system. Where did you start? If you don't understand the system or what is capable of what it does. In all the entities that you're auditing, let's say, even if it's not big, if they're giving you a report, is that report generated manually, pen on paper, or is it coming from system? If it comes from system, how would you know somebody might not change tomorrow after they gave you the report? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. How would you be able to rely on that information if you don't know all the controls, internal controls that produced those statements or those reports? Okay, let's jump on to the application controls. Just the definition, application controls are controls over the input, processing, and output. So ISO auditor must be able to gain detailed understanding of the application and various control techniques as this impacts the audit strategy for detailed testing. So if you could get enough comfort from internal controls, then you will reduce the amount of substantive details tests you are doing it, and vice versa. If you're not able to rely, then you'll have to do enough substantive work to get you assurance. I would like to add, it's not only the input, processing, output, but those are the key when it comes to the application and how it works. But all the GCC we talked about, also remember, either the same would apply to the application, because I've explained over there, the security requirement, system development and acquisition, IT operations, business continuity will apply to all the applications. So the application you are looking is applied at a high level, but on an application level also, let's say, does this application require authentication? Not only the network authentication, now we're talking about application security. If we're talking about daily operations, we're not talking about help desk. Does this application require, let's say, job scheduling, jobs to be run? So some of the general computer controls also at application level also might be applicable. So not only input, processing, output, but you'll have to still consider the general computer controls that could be applicable to the application, and you really need to carry those also. So since we've explained that at the GCC level, we're not going to repeat it, but here we're probably going to concentrate only on input, processing, and output. So we've already talked about ISO auditor must be able to identify and understand controls designed to ensure the authorization, accuracy, completeness of the data input, processing by and output from various business and computer applications. So when you're looking at a control, application control, even though it's input, processing, output, you might be looking, am I looking at authorization? Am I looking at completeness? Am I looking at accuracy? So some of the same items that you would have looked in a normal detail of test might still apply at the application level, because these are business transactions, most likely, their core business. Application control is vital in ensuring integrity and reliability of input, process, and output functions within a computer system. So this is just a depiction how on an application level, people in the applications interact. So it starts with people, somebody have to input data, a person or maybe a file is inputted, it will process, let's say, an example of a financial system. If I'm putting a journal entries, so I have to put a journal entry, and I have to say, press enter, isn't it? If I enter debit only, if there is a edit checks that validates, don't process until debit and credits are equal, or even I enter debit, and then I enter 2 credits that doesn't equal to the debit, then automatically it will not process. So those are input controls. Another one we talked about is if I'm entering individual data and the national ID is a certain length, let's say 15, if I input anything less, it will not accept, because those are already controls that are built into the system, which is edit checks. Processing controls could be totals that I will check, like all my inputs, is it the same as the totals that are processed? Also, when things are processed, remember we were talking about job scheduling or even a backup could be some process, isn't it, on an application? There could be errors. So it's very important at the processing identification of errors and how errors are corrected. So it's processing output, and then there is a database level and storage. So this basically gives you a depiction of an application. So application controls testing, we said we'll concentrate on the 3, input, processing, and output. So for input controls, there are data checks and validations. So reasonableness or limit checks on financial values. So you could put some limits. That's a reasonable check. You could also make sure that transaction is not processed unless all the required fields are entered. That doesn't mean everything would be accurate. As we said, if you require 15-digit length and the person enters 15-0, it still might take it. But at least it's limiting the potential errors or the potential non-compliance or the potential data inaccuracies. But still, it could happen. Sequence checks, range checks, check digits, cross checks. So sometimes if I'm entering at, like in US, on addresses, people have a zip code. So I could easily have a master data of zip codes. So if I enter a zip code that doesn't exist, it wouldn't allow. So it's checking against that master. So a lot of times you might realize there is a master data, which is basically data that exists all the time. And any data input that is being checked, if there is a validation check, it cross-checks on that master data. If it matches, then it accepts. If it doesn't match, it wouldn't accept. Customer number is one of them. Like if I'm establishing a customer, I'll put the customer information first, isn't it? Bank account, name, address, everything. So when I might even give a number. So later when they bill, if any of those critical information does not include, then it wouldn't accept that voucher, let's say, input, because I already have. If, let's say, another might input the same bank account, I could code it in a way that 2 suppliers or 2 vendors cannot have the same bank account. So it will not accept. Whether it was an error or on purpose, then it wouldn't accept. So there are multiple, those are what it's called validation checks against the master file. So that could also be used, especially as input checks. Some of those, especially on the input, you might not even need, especially the validation and all of those. I mean, you might need if it takes and it doesn't have, but some of them, if they all actually exist, you could test it in live environment. But if they don't exist and you enter a transaction, then that could show me create a problem. Approvals and overrides and segregation of duties is another thing you also look. Again, this goes back to the security of the application. Who has access to what? Who could override? Remember, we've also said, if we have a privileged access, somebody who could override, then I need to look at exception report. All the person who has that privilege, actually, did they do that activity or not? Did they override any transaction? So something that I could look at it as a monitoring report or monitoring control. So segregation of duty also, we will look at who has access or privilege that is not compatible, such as input. an approval at the same time. Sometimes it could happen, but still the application could be coded in such a way that when the transaction is happening, I cannot be both the input and approver, even though I might have both access. But now workflow would not allow me, because workflow is another way application works. So even though if another person enters, I have an approval privilege that I could approve, but I cannot be both the input and approver. So there are multiple ways of doing it. That sometimes it's not only, that's why if you see something that is wrong, then always ask, what is the compensating control? Or do you have this other control to compensate? Processing controls, automated file identification and validation. All files for processing are available and complete. A lot of times you will look at total numbers of what has been processed is similar to total numbers that are input. So if I'm running a payroll, I need to look at the total numbers that I know, but also total number of employees. Automated functionality calculations, the journal entries that I was telling you is the same thing. If the two are not balanced, then it won't process. Specific calculations conducted in one or more input and stored data element to produce additional data element is accurate. Correct utilization of existing data tables. We talked about master file or master table, rating tables, pricing table. Those could be master files. Audit trail logs, it's something, again, that is very important, especially at the application level because of the transaction. And especially if we are talking about privilege access or overrides, then my detective control is audit trail log. I have to create an exception report that shows me the privileged users, what their activity was. So I have to go to the audit trail logs. Job scheduling and processing. As we've said, within the application, how transactions are captured could be two. Either it is timely, which is basically as I enter, it captures the database, or as I enter, it keeps in a separate file and it runs as a job at a given time, maybe late at night. As we said, the banks and stuff, they don't disturb. They try to run any updates at the middle of the night. So job scheduling and processing is important. Data processing checks and validations, total checks, mostly processing, you check what is input, is it being also the output, or what is being processed. If there is any errors, then you need to really identify. Rejected records, those are the errors. So if I'm processing multiple transactions, or if I run a payroll and there is an error or rejected transactions or specific individuals, I need to be able to deal with it and either rerun it or run those separately. So it's always very good to ask, is like, how do you deal with errors or rejected transactions? Interface balancing, automated checking of data received from other systems, automated checking that balances on both systems match. If not, exception report is generated and utilized. Duplicate checks. The same way that I said about not allowing bank account from the input, but now in the processing, if they want to issue a check, if it one already been issued to the same person or to the same account, to the same amount, I could code it and say, same person, same bank account, same amount, don't issue, automatically reject. So that is within the processing validation rule that could be built. So a lot of duplication things you could build, like if I'm putting and paying a payroll of the same person is the same thing, vendor is the same thing, to avoid any duplication. especially on the same period, if I'm running either monthly or payment on a, so the vendor, you will say, okay, not only the person, but also, let's say the vendor invoice number. If it's the same, don't pay twice. Unless it allows a breakdown. Then you will say, okay, all of this plus this total amount. If the amounts are also equal, don't. So there is a multiple ways of checking duplicate items or duplicate transaction. Output controls. A lot of times I haven't dealt, but I could think of cases where output is very important. Remember we talked about data and classification secret. So if I classified something secret, a report from application, then who could actually and even have access to that report? Who could either print? Would you allow to even save it? So you could set controls on that output. Even though it's generated, who could generate it? Who could have access to it? And who could actually do anything, maybe save or print or things like that. So that is one thing. Review any records are maintained to control output distribution and check that they are adequate and sufficient to identify who received authorized outputs. Another way, one of the companies that I worked dealt with it was in any printing, let's say if it's confidential, it might require you your pass, your card. So you have to go to the printer, put your card in, then it will print what you print. So it's almost like confidentiality. It doesn't want somebody else things to be printed laying on the printer top. So that is an output control. Basically, whoever is authorized, whoever printed could only use that printer. There are also control files. So you could look at it the same way, input and processing. You will look at the total transactions that are processed at the tail end to what has been input and processed. So as an output control file. If something is being printed, let's say checks are printed, who has access to that printer? Is it physically secure? Checks are also something that system, if it has the capability to print, that you want to make sure that there is an output controls around it. Either lock it in a room or who have access first to be able to print a check. All of those would be an output controls of the application. Any questions? Say it again. What do you see? You said on your USB, you cannot write anything. Yeah. It is something probably manufacturers might have done it as a control that you cannot write. That is something. Some of the USBs could be encrypted. Some other entities might not even allow you to copy anything from USB. So they will basically disable the USB drives. So if they are afraid of data leakage, so they will disallow any usage of the USB. So you wouldn't be able to put a USB, the whole drives would be not used, would be disabled, the USB drives. So it depends the type of USB and what it was that it was trying.
How do we evaluate a bespoke application?
Ah. bespoke applications developed for a specific entity. First and foremost, remember on the development, we talked about one of the tail ends of the requirement or controls were, did they issue or did they produce manuals? So both user manual and technical manual. Once I have the manual, at least I could read the manual, do a process walkthrough with them. First and foremost, understand how the system works. Once I understand how the system works, then I could test it. There is a two ways to test application, these inputs, processing, and output. Remember, at the end of the day, this is just generic terms. At the end of the day, it's the specific process that I'm testing. So there is one way that it's called ITF, Integrated Test Facility. It is basically you try to take a copy of the production application and you ask them to put it in a test environment, maybe your laptop, just say, or create a desktop for you that is just a test environment. Once that is done, what you need to do is you need to come up with all the scenarios, good or bad, that you could think of. All the risk may be of a transaction. When we're talking about edit checks, I will see if I could enter numeric on a name field, if I could enter less than the ID number, all of those to basically test if all of these edit checks are part of the application. Some of them might fail, some of them might not. So what I do is on my test sheet, I will create a scenario, let's say 100 different scenarios. I will have to come up with expected outcome. Because my expectation is that the bad ones should not happen. The good ones should happen. And then I will run it through the test environment. I will actually key in those transactions because those are dummy transactions because I'm testing the system. And whatever the outcome is, I need to document, whether as a screenshot, but also on my test sheet. If my expectation is met, then there is no problem. If my expectation is not met, then that's an issue that I need to identify. That is one way. That is basically you are testing the control. All it's going to tell you that there is a weakness in the controls that you found weakness. Another way of testing it, which is probably much better, because you're not only testing control weakness, at the same time you could get an impact, is you could take, not edit checks in this case, but you could take edit checks, it still would come up in this one. If you take a data dump on a data analytics, I could take all the anomalies that I could think of, all the scenarios that shouldn't happen, and I will get through the data. If I could pick up those anomalies, remember, those are actual transactions. So now I even have the number of transactions that were incorrect. Not only that I identified control weakness, but I actually have, if it's monetary item, then I have figure for financial. If it's something that was a non-compliance, now I have all the transactions that are non-compliant, which I could easily put my report. So those are the best two ways, at least, to test whether the application is behaving the way it's supposed to be, from business-wise, but also from IT controls-wise.
We have come across a certain case scenario where development was outsourced.
Yeah.
And certainly what the product was developed, it was at variance with the user requirement. What should be our fund? They outsource and the product they adopted was way too far from user requirement originally shared with the developer.
Okay. Question is, what do you have asked before? Have they done user acceptance testing? And if they done user acceptance testing should have been based on the user requirement. So before you came in, they should have identified, and for whatever the reason, if they identified and approved it and allowed, then they must have documented their reason. But if they haven't done user acceptance testing, that is where the problem then lies. because they didn't know basically what they are adapting. So how do they approve this development to move into production? Somebody approved it. So that person will take the responsibility. And you will identify as such. You say, this is your user requirement. This, it doesn't do, this application does not do as user requirement documents. Plus, then you will say, test has not been done and it has been approved. Any other question? I don't think that was the last. Any questions, any examples, any comments on any of the things we've learned? We've talked about planning, we talked about execution. During the execution, we talked about general computer controls, we talked about application controls now. The only thing that remains is reporting and communication, which is no different than the way that normal financial audit reports, but we will cover to finalize the cycle.
Can we share here a specimen report that covers all our modules?
I could take a look at it. Yeah. See if I have any old reports, but I have to try to anonymize it in order to share. I mean, it doesn't cover every scenario, but it covers all different domains that have issues, basically.
There is a maturity model
Yes,
analysis. So if an entity is short of maturity level, whether it is cognizable before public account.
that's a different level, isn't it? When we talk about maturity model, it means that I have all the controls that we are talking about, but it might not be mature enough. Some of them may be design operating effectiveness is not operating as needed. That's a different level. But yes, once everybody is on the same page, then you look at maturity model. How good are you managing the entity's resources, which is the entity's IT? So that's a level that is good to have. When the discussion is a maturity model, it means at least they've covered the basis. Yeah, there is a maturity model. I think ISACA, you could see it. There is a maturity model. COBIT, yeah, has the maturity model. And it explains, yeah, and what does it mean? There's 4 or 5 different levels. It's nothing other than consistency of application, applying the controls. Yes. Exactly. So it takes it during a period also. Every 2 or 3, 4 years, when you audited the same entity, then you could see their maturity model is. What I think is more important is rather than maturity model, what at one time we tried, and actually it did help, is if you've done an audit 4 years or 5 years, try to compile all the issues related, let's say, on security, but by domain, security, system development or acquisition, then it gives you a picture of where the government actually is in that regard. And then you could recommend on the public account, say, okay, we need to improve in this area. So it's much better to look at it holistically rather than one individual entity's maturity. So tomorrow we'll have a probably half day, isn't it? Okay, if you guys don't have any questions, I'll see you tomorrow morning, inshallah.